For 3,000 years, the Dragon Emperor Mordrath sat on his throne of black stone and ice, and in all that time, he never accepted a single gift. Not one. Every king, every president, every planetary ruler who came before him brought their finest treasures, and every single time, he turned them away. The alien species called the Vorkath once brought him a diamond the size of a small moon. They'd spent 2 centuries mining it from the core of a dying planet. Mordrath glanced at it for maybe 3 seconds before waving his massive claw in dismissal. The Vorkath ambassador nearly fainted from shame. Another race, the insectoid chitters, presented him with a living star they'd somehow captured and contained in an energy field. The emperor didn't even bother looking up from his throne. He just said one word, no. It became legendary across the galaxy. Attempting to give tribute to the Dragon Emperor was like trying to impress the ocean with a cup of water. Pointless. Humiliating. And yet, species kept trying because that's what you did when you joined the Celestial Imperium. You paid your respects. You showed gratitude for protection. You brought gifts. Mordrath hated every second of it. The truth was, nothing impressed him anymore. When you've lived for 3 millennia, when you've seen civilizations rise and fall like waves on a beach, when you've watched 1,000 sunsets on 1,000 different worlds, everything starts to feel the same. That diamond moon? Just compressed carbon. The captured star? Just burning hydrogen. The elaborate weapons, the ancient artifacts, the promises of loyalty written in blood on sacred scrolls? All of it felt hollow. His court learned to dread tribute ceremonies. They'd watch nervous ambassadors shuffle forward with their carefully prepared gifts, and everyone knew how it would end. The emperor would look, sometimes he wouldn't even do that, and then he'd refuse. Some ambassadors left angry. Most left confused. A few left in tears. But they all left empty-handed. Then humans showed up. Earth had been discovered about 50 years ago, tucked away in a quiet corner of the galaxy that nobody really paid attention to. Humans had just figured out faster-than-light travel using some weird engine design that made traditional physicists want to scream. They were young, enthusiastic, and absolutely clueless about galactic politics. When they joined the Imperium, they did something shocking. Nothing. They paid their taxes on time, followed the laws, stayed out of trouble, and went about their business. They didn't send elaborate delegations to the imperial capital. They didn't commission massive artworks depicting the emperor's glory. They didn't spend decades crafting the perfect tribute. This annoyed some of the older species. The Vorkath, still bitter about their rejected moon diamond, muttered that humans didn't understand proper respect. The chitters clicked their mandibles in disapproval, saying humans were too casual about imperial protocol. But Mordrath? He found it refreshing. For the first time in centuries, he actually paid attention to species reports. Humans were spreading out, establishing colonies on frontier worlds that other species considered too risky or too boring. They brought their music, their art, their bizarre sense of humor, and their strange habit of naming everything. One colony named their settlement New Brooklyn, even though they were 12,000 light-years from Earth. Another called their space station Big Carl, after someone's uncle. The Emperor's advisors didn't know what to make of them. Neither did Mordrath, honestly. But at least they were interesting. Then the meteor storm hit Perseus 7. It was a human colony on a small moon, home to about 2,000 people. They were farmers mostly, growing food in massive atmosphere domes, living quiet lives far from the chaos of the galactic core. The storm came out of nowhere, a cluster of rogue asteroids that slammed into the moon with devastating force. 3 of the main domes were destroyed instantly. The air processing plants went offline. Power grids failed. 234 people died in the first hour. When the emergency report reached the imperial capital, it landed on the desk of some mid-level administrator who was supposed to evaluate whether imperial intervention was warranted. Standard procedure said colonies needed to formally request aid through proper channels. There were forms to fill out, protocols to follow, committees to consult. Mordrath read the report and did something he'd never done before. He bypassed every single protocol and ordered immediate emergency relief. He didn't wait for a formal request. He didn't consult committees. He just commanded his supply ships to load up with everything the colony needed and get there as fast as physically possible. His advisors were shocked. Your Majesty, this sets a dangerous precedent. If we respond to every colonial disaster without proper requests. They're too new to know the proper channels, Mordrath interrupted. By the time they figure out the paperwork, half the colony will be dead. Send the supplies. Now. The supply convoy arrived at Perseus 7 within 3 days. Food synthesizers, atmosphere processors, medical equipment, construction drones, temporary housing units, and enough raw materials to rebuild everything they'd lost. The colonists were stunned. They'd been preparing for weeks of survival rationing, maybe months before official help arrived. Instead, the most powerful being in the galaxy had personally ensured their rescue. 3 weeks later, a single human shuttle requested an audience with the Dragon Emperor. The entire imperial court buzzed with speculation. Surely this was it. Humanity would finally present a tribute. They'd probably bring something uniquely human, something creative and unexpected that might actually interest the Emperor. Every species in the galaxy tuned in to watch the broadcast, curious to see what gift could possibly break Mordratha's 3,000-year streak of refusals. Ambassador Jack Miller stood in the massive throne room, looking impossibly small beneath the vaulted ceilings of crystalline stone. He was clearly nervous, shifting his weight from foot to foot, but there was something genuine in his expression. Not the calculated deference most ambassadors wore like a mask. Just honest gratitude. Your Majesty, he began, his voice barely echoing in the vast chamber, the people of Perseus 7 wanted to thank you. We know we're new to the Imperium. We don't really understand all the traditions yet. But when you saved our colony, you saved our families. Our children. He paused. The kids wanted to give you something. It's not much, but it's what they had. Mordrath almost waved him away. Almost. But something in Miller's voice stopped him. There was no hidden agenda there, no political maneuvering. Just a man trying to say thank you. The Emperor leaned forward slightly on his throne. Show me, he said. Ambassador Jack Miller signaled to the crew waiting outside, and 4 people walked into the throne room carrying boxes. Not ornate chests made of rare metals. Just regular cardboard boxes, the kind you'd use for moving apartments. The kind with slightly bent corners and packing tape holding them together. The imperial court watched in confusion. Some of the alien dignitaries whispered to each other in their various languages. A few actually laughed, thinking this was some kind of human joke they didn't understand yet. The Vorkath ambassador, still salty about his rejected moon diamond, made a disgusted clicking sound with his throat. Miller didn't seem to notice or care. He walked forward and carefully opened the first box. Inside were stacks of paper. Just paper. Some white, some colored, all different sizes. He lifted out the first stack and began carrying individual pieces toward the throne. These are from the children of Perseus 7, Miller explained, his voice steady despite his obvious nervousness. 400 cards, one from each kid in the colony. After you saved us, they wanted to say thank you. But we don't have much out there on the frontier. No fancy materials, no artists, no expensive gifts. So the kids made these themselves. He held up the first card for the Emperor to see. Mordrath stared at it. His massive eyes, each one the size of a dinner plate, focused on the small rectangle of paper. It was a drawing made with crayons. A stick figure with wings and what might have been scales stood next to a smaller stick figure. Both were smiling. Above them, a bright yellow sun with lines radiating out. At the bottom, in careful letters that showed a child had worked hard on the penmanship, "Thank you for the food. You saved my daddy. Love, Lily." The throne room went completely silent. You could have heard a pin drop on the polished stone floor. The Emperor reached out with one massive claw, moving with a delicacy that seemed impossible for something so huge. He took the card between 2 talons, holding it like it was made of spider silk. For a long moment, he just looked at it. Then he reached for the next one. This card showed a purple dragon breathing what appeared to be rainbow fire down onto a planet. Tiny stick figures on the planet were waving up at the dragon with their arms raised. The dragon was smiling. At the bottom, "You saved us when we were scared. My mom says you're a real hero." From Tyler, age 7. Mordrath took the third card. A green dragon sitting on a throne with a crown made of stars. Little hearts floating around its head. "You're the best emperor ever. Thank you for helping. Ashley." Card after card. Each one different. Each one clearly made by a child's hands. Some showed dragons, some showed spaceships, some were just colorful scribbles with "thank you" written in big letters. The spelling was often wrong. The proportions were off. The colors didn't always make sense. One kid had drawn the Emperor as a blue dragon with pink spots wearing a top hat for some reason. They were imperfect. Messy. Made with cheap crayons and markers on regular paper. And Mordrath couldn't stop looking at them. His court watched in absolute shock as their Emperor, the being who had dismissed priceless treasures without a second glance, sat on his throne and examined every single card with careful attention. He didn't rush. He didn't skim. He looked at each one like it was the only thing in the universe. Some cards had longer messages. A 10-year-old named Jake had written 3 paragraphs about how scared he'd been when the meteors hit, how he thought they were all going to die, and how he cried with relief when the supply ships arrived. "You didn't have to help us," Jake wrote in careful handwriting. "But you did anyway. That's what makes you great." Another card showed a family portrait. Stick figures labeled Emma, Dad, Emmy, and baby brother standing in front of a dome. Above them, a massive dragon with wings spread wide like a shield. "You protected my family. I'll never forget. Love, Olivia." Miller kept bringing cards forward, placing them carefully where the Emperor could reach them. His crew helped, creating a steady stream of children's artwork flowing toward the throne. The other ambassadors and court officials just stood there, too stunned to move or speak. An hour passed. Then 2. Mordrath read every card. The 327th card was from a 6-year-old named Mason who had drawn himself riding on the dragon's back, flying through space. "When I grow up I want to be brave like you." The 361st card showed a hospital bed with a stick figure in it, and a dragon bringing medicine. "You sent doctors for my grandma. She's better now. Thank you so much. Grace." Then he reached card number 386. It was simpler than many of the others. A dragon and a small human figure standing side by side, holding hands. Both were smiling. The dragon had been colored with particular care. Someone had spent real time on it, layering different shades of black and gray crayon to show depth and texture on each scale. Silver had been added for highlights. The wings were spread wide, but not in an aggressive way. More like a protective gesture. At the bottom, in slightly shaky handwriting, "You made me feel safe when I was really scared. Thank you for saving us. Love, Rachel, age 9, Orphan Block 7." Orphan Block 7. Mordrath's claw froze. He read the words again. Orphan Block. The meteor storm hadn't just damaged buildings and equipment. 234 people had died. Which meant there were children who had lost parents. Children who had been terrified and alone, who had watched the sky literally fall on their world, who had lost everything. And one of those children had drawn a picture of holding his hand because he made her feel safe. The throne room was so quiet you could hear the Emperor's breathing, a sound like wind through caverns. He held the card carefully, his massive eyes fixed on those 2 simple figures holding hands. Ambassador Miller noticed the Emperor had stopped going through the cards. "Your Majesty? There are still about 100 more if you'd like to." "Tell me about Rachel," Mordrath interrupted. His voice was quieter than anyone had ever heard it. Softer. Almost gentle. Miller pulled out his datapad, fumbling slightly with it. Nobody interrupted the Dragon Emperor. Nobody made demands of him. But here he was, asking about one specific child out of 400. "Rachel Anderson, Your Majesty. Age 9 standard years. Parents were Jennifer and Robert Anderson, both worked in the Agricultural Research Division. They were killed in the initial meteor impact when Dome 3 suffered total decompression." Miller's voice caught slightly. "No other living relatives. She's currently in our orphan facility with 47 other children who lost family in the disaster." "Has she been placed with a new family?" the Emperor asked. Miller hesitated. "The colony is still recovering, Your Majesty. Most families are struggling to feed and house the children they already have. We're doing our best at the facility, but permanent adoptions will take time. Years, probably. We just don't have the resources yet." "Years," Mordrath repeated. And there was something in his voice that made every being in that throne room take an involuntary step backward. Not anger. Something else. Something none of them had ever heard from him before in 3,000 years of rule. It sounded like heartbreak. Ambassador Miller stood there holding his datapad, suddenly very aware that the temperature in the throne room had dropped several degrees. When dragons got emotional, the air around them changed. Everyone in the Imperial Court knew this, but most had never actually witnessed it because Mordrath simply didn't get emotional. He was a stone wall. A mountain. Unchanging and unmovable. But right now, frost was forming on the edges of his obsidian throne. "Pull up her full file," the Emperor said quietly. "I want to know everything." Miller's hands shook slightly as he navigated through the colony records. Rachel Anderson. Born March 15th, Standard Earth Calendar. Parents were xenobotanists, studied how Earth plants could be adapted to grow in alien environments. They were working on a new strain of wheat when the disaster hit. He scrolled down. Rachel was at school in Dome 5 when the meteor struck. She saw Dome 3 explode from the classroom window. Saw the air venting into space. She knew her parents were in there. The frost spread further across the throne. Several of the alien dignitaries were now visibly shivering. Psychological evaluation shows signs of trauma consistent with sudden loss and disaster exposure, Miller continued. Nightmares, anxiety, difficulty sleeping. But her teachers report she's been remarkably resilient. She's actually been helping the younger kids in the orphan facility cope with their own losses. Reads to them at bedtime. Helps them with homework. One of the counselors noted that she seems to process her grief by taking care of others. Mordrath was still holding the card, looking at those two crane figures holding hands. She's 9 years old, he said. She watched her parents die. She lost her home. She has every reason to be angry at the universe, to curse fate, to withdraw into herself. He looked up at Miller. And instead she drew a picture of holding my hand because I made her feel safe. Yes, Your Majesty. What are conditions like in this orphan facility? Miller shifted uncomfortably. It's adequate, Your Majesty. Clean, climate-controlled, regular meals. The staff does their best. But it's 48 kids with only 6 full-time caretakers. They're overwhelmed. The building was originally meant to be temporary housing for new colonists, so it's pretty institutional. Rows of bunk beds, communal bathrooms, one recreation room with donated toys. It's not terrible, but it's not home. It's just a place to keep them alive until we can find real families for them. Show me pictures. Miller pulled up images on his datapad and projected them on the wall where everyone could see. The facility looked exactly how he described it. Sterile. Functional. Clean white walls with no decoration. Metal bunk beds lined up in rows. Children's belongings stored in small plastic bins under each bed. The recreation room had a worn carpet and shelves of toys that looked like they'd been donated from various families' attics. There was an attempt at cheerfulness. Someone had painted a mural of stars and planets on one wall, but you could feel the institutional sadness of the place even through photographs. One image showed the children at dinner. They sat at long tables, eating what looked like standard protein rations and vegetables. Some kids were talking and laughing, showing the incredible resilience of children. But others just stared at their plates with that hollow look that came from losing too much too young. Another photo showed bedtime. Rows and rows of bunk beds, each with a child trying to sleep. One little girl was clutching a stuffed animal so tightly her knuckles were white. A boy in the back had his blanket pulled over his head completely. These were children who no longer felt safe in the dark. Mordrath studied each image in silence. His court members glanced at each other nervously, unsure what was happening. The Emperor had never shown this level of interest in anything before, let alone a human orphanage on a frontier moon nobody cared about. How many total orphans from the disaster? He asked. 48, Your Majesty. Ages ranging from 3 to 16. Some have extended family elsewhere in human space, but interstellar adoption is complicated. Legal paperwork, travel costs, verification processes. It takes years even in the best circumstances. And the colony doesn't have resources to place them locally. Miller shook his head. Perseus 7 is a farming colony, Your Majesty. Everyone works hard just to keep food production going. Most families are already stretched thin. They want to help, but taking in additional children when you can barely feed your own isn't realistic. A few of the older teenagers have been fostered by families who need extra hands for farm work, but the younger ones just wait. They wait, Mordrath repeated. For years. In a sterile building with overwhelmed staff and donated toys. While the galaxy moves on and forgets they exist. We haven't forgotten them, Your Majesty, Miller said defensively. We're doing everything we can with what we have. I know you are. I'm not criticizing your efforts, Ambassador. I'm simply stating the reality. The Emperor set Rachel's card down carefully on the arm of his throne, positioning it so he could still see it. I have ruled this empire for 3,000 years, he said slowly. I have commanded fleets of 10,000 ships. I have negotiated treaties between species that had been at war for millennia. I have built stations that house billions of beings. I have moved planets when necessary for strategic purposes. He stood up, his massive form uncoiling to full height. The throne room seemed to shrink around him. Ice crystals were now forming on the floor around his feet. I have done all of this, he continued, and been praised as wise, powerful, and just. Other species write epic poems about my reign. They build monuments in my honor. They name their children after me. His voice grew softer, almost wondering. And in 3,000 years, I have never once made a single being feel safe. The court was completely silent. No one knew what to say. This wasn't how the Dragon Emperor talked. This wasn't how he acted. That child lost everything, Mordrath said. Her parents. Her home. Her sense of security in the universe. She faced the kind of trauma that breaks adults, let alone 9-year-olds. And when I sent supplies because it was the logical thing to do, the strategic thing to do, the thing that prevented a bigger crisis down the line, she interpreted it as care. As protection. As love. He looked at all 400 cards spread around his throne. They all did. These children took an act of imperial efficiency and saw compassion. They took a dragon they should fear and drew pictures of friendship. They took tragedy and responded with gratitude. He picked up Rachel's card again. And this one drew us holding hands because I made her feel safe. Mordrath looked directly at Ambassador Miller. I need to meet her. I need to meet all of them. Arrange for an imperial visit to Perseus 7. I want to inspect the colony's recovery personally. Miller's eyes went wide. Your Majesty, an imperial visit requires months of preparation. Security arrangements, diplomatic protocols, facility upgrades. Then we skip the protocols. I don't need ceremonies or parades. I need to see that orphanage. I need to understand what these children are living through. The Emperor's voice took on an edge of command that made everyone in the room straighten unconsciously. And I need to look a 9-year-old girl in the eye and tell her that when she drew us holding hands, she made a promise. She promised that connection is possible even in darkness. That hope can survive tragedy. That power used with compassion creates safety instead of fear. He turned back to his throne, carefully gathering all 400 cards. And I'm going to make her a promise in return. What promise, Your Majesty? Miller asked quietly. That she was right to draw us holding hands. That she was right to feel safe. And that no child under my protection will ever spend years waiting in an institutional facility because the galaxy forgot they existed. Frost spread across the entire throne now, beautiful and cold and absolute. For 3,000 years, I've refused every tribute because nothing had value. But these cards taught me something. Value isn't measured in rarity or cost. It's measured in heart. In sincerity. In the courage to say thank you even when you've lost everything. He looked at the card one more time. 2 figures holding hands, both smiling. Prepare my ship, Ambassador. I'm going to Perseus 7. And when I leave, those 48 children will know exactly what an emperor's protection means. The Dragon Emperor's ship arrived at Perseus 7 exactly 1 week later, and the entire colony went into a controlled panic. Nobody had ever prepared for an imperial visit in just 7 days. Normally it took months, sometimes years. There were protocols to memorize, ceremonies to rehearse, buildings to renovate, speeches to write. The colony governor, a tired woman named Patricia Hayes, had barely slept since getting the notification. But when Mordrath's massive vessel settled onto the landing pad in a cloud of displaced dust, the Emperor's first words through the communication channel were simple: no ceremonies. No speeches. Show me how your people are actually living. Governor Hayes nearly cried with relief. The Emperor emerged from his ship in a form that was slightly smaller than his full size, though he still towered over every building in the colony. Dragons could adjust their physical dimensions within certain limits, and Mordrath had compressed himself to about the size of a large house. Still massive, still awe-inspiring, but at least he wouldn't accidentally crush anything just by moving around. He walked through the colony with Governor Hayes and Ambassador Miller, his claws clicking softly on the metal walkways between domes. Colonists stopped what they were doing to stare. Most had never seen a dragon in person before, let alone the Dragon Emperor himself. Parents instinctively pulled their children closer, then felt embarrassed about it because this was the being who had saved them all. Mordrath noticed but didn't comment. Fear was natural. Respect was earned. They toured the repaired agricultural domes first. The Emperor listened carefully as farmers explained how they'd modified their planting cycles to make up for lost time. One middle-aged man named David showed him the new irrigation system they designed using parts from the Imperial supply ships combined with salvaged components from the destroyed domes. We didn't want to waste anything, David explained nervously. You gave us so much, seemed wrong not to use every bit of it. That's good thinking, Mordrath replied. Resourcefulness is what built humanity's expansion into space. It will serve you well. David looked shocked that the Emperor had complimented him. He'd probably tell that story for the rest of his life. They visited the memorial garden next. 234 names carved into a wall of local stone, each one representing a life lost. Flowers had been planted around it, Earth flowers that struggled in the alien soil but survived through sheer stubborn determination. Just like the colonists themselves. Mordrath read every name. All 234. It took almost an hour, and his entourage stood in respectful silence while he did it. When he reached Jennifer and Robert Anderson, Rachel's parents, he stopped for a long moment. His claw traced their names gently. They were working to feed people, he said quietly. Growing food in difficult conditions so their community could thrive. That's honorable work. Governor Hayes nodded, her throat tight. They were good people. We missed them. Then it was time to visit Orphan Block 7. The facility wasn't far from the main colony center, a boxy prefabricated building that looked exactly like what it was. Temporary housing that had become permanent because there was no other option. Someone had tried to make it welcoming by painting colorful murals on the exterior walls, but you could still see the industrial serial numbers stamped on the metal panels. Inside, the staff had done their best to prepare. The floors were freshly mopped. The children were cleaned up and wearing their nicest clothes. Toys had been organized neatly on shelves. But you couldn't hide the basic reality of the place. It was an institution. A warehouse for children waiting for real lives to begin. 48 kids stood in the common room, arranged roughly by age. The older teenagers stood in back, trying to look composed and mature. The middle kids fidgeted nervously. The little ones, those under 6, mostly hid behind the caregiver's legs or clutched stuffed animals for comfort. When Mordrath entered, even though he'd made himself as small as possible, he still dominated the space. A dragon in a room built for humans. Several of the younger children gasped. One started to cry but was quickly comforted by an older girl who picked her up and whispered that it was okay. The Emperor's eyes scanned the room, taking in every detail. The worn carpet. The donated furniture that didn't quite match. The attempt at decoration that couldn't hide the sadness of the place. And most of all, the faces of the children. Some curious, some frightened, some trying desperately to be brave. Then he saw Rachel. She stood in the middle group, holding the hand of a small boy who couldn't have been more than 5. He was half hidden behind her, peeking around her shoulder at the dragon with wide eyes. Rachel herself looked nervous but determined. She'd been scrubbed clean for the visit, her brown hair pulled back in a neat ponytail. She wore a dress that was slightly too small, probably donated, and sneakers that had seen better days. But what caught Mordrath's attention was her expression. It wasn't fear, exactly. It was more like she was seeing something she'd only imagined. Like a character from a story had suddenly become real. "You are Rachel," the Emperor said, his voice as gentle as distant thunder. She tried to curtsy, something she'd clearly been taught that morning and hadn't quite mastered. The little boy behind her attempted to copy her and nearly fell over. "Yes, Your Majesty," Rachel said. Her voice was small but steady. "This is Kevin. He's 5. He gets scared sometimes, so I look after him." She paused. "Did you really get my card? The one I drew?" "I did. I got all of them. But yours was special." "Why?" Rachel asked with the direct honesty that only children possess. Mordrath lowered his massive head until his eyes were level with hers. Up close, she could see that his eyes weren't just one color but had depths like looking into caves filled with crystals. "Because you drew us holding hands. You said I made you feel safe." Rachel nodded seriously. "You did. When the bad thing happened, when the sky broke and my mom and dad," her voice wavered but she pushed through. "After that, everything was scary. But then Ambassador Miller told us you sent help. That you made sure would be okay. And I thought, if someone that big and powerful wants us to be safe, then maybe we really will be." The little boy, Kevin, peeked out more from behind Rachel. "Are you really 3,000 years old?" he asked suddenly. Despite the heaviness of the moment, Mordrath's mouth curved in what might have been a smile. "I am." "That's really old," Kevin said with the brutal honesty of a 5-year-old. Several caregivers looked horrified, but the Emperor actually chuckled, a sound like rocks tumbling deep underground. "It is very old," he agreed. "Old enough to have learned many things. But not old enough to have learned everything." He straightened up, addressing all 48 children now. "You taught me something important with those cards. You made me understand that power without compassion is empty. That protection isn't just about supplying food and shelter. It's about making people feel safe." He turned to Rachel again. "You drew us holding hands. In many cultures, that's more than just a picture. It's a promise. A promise of trust and protection and connection." "I didn't mean to make a promise," Rachel said quickly, worried she'd done something wrong. "Perhaps not intentionally. But you did anyway. You promised that even when things are dark, we can reach out to each other. That even after terrible loss, hope is possible. The Emperor's voice resonated through the room. And now I'm going to make you a promise in return. All of you. The room went completely silent. Even the youngest children sensed something important was happening. You will not spend years in this facility, Mordrath declared. As of this moment, I am establishing an imperial wardship. Each of you 48 children becomes my personal responsibility. You will have real homes with families who have been carefully chosen and screened. You will have education, opportunity, and every resource the Imperium can provide. And most importantly, he looked directly at Rachel and Kevin. If you are ever scared again, if you ever feel unsafe, you can call me. There will be a way to reach me directly. And I will answer. That is my promise to you. The transformation didn't happen overnight, but when a 3,000-year-old Dragon Emperor decides something will happen, the universe has a way of making it happen quickly. Within 2 weeks, the Imperial Wardship Program was officially established. The announcement went out across all 10,000 worlds of the Celestial Imperium, and the response was immediate and overwhelming. Thousands of families applied to adopt the children of Perseus 7. Some genuinely wanted to help. Others saw it as a path to imperial favor. The Emperor's staff had to create an entirely new department just to process applications. The screening process was brutal. Criminal background checks that went back 3 generations. Financial audits. Home inspections. Psychological evaluations. References from employers, neighbors, and local community leaders. Each family was interviewed multiple times by teams of specialists. The standards were higher than those used for imperial security clearances. If they're not good enough to protect my life, Mordrath explained to his advisors, they're not good enough to raise these children. Out of thousands of applicants, only 48 families passed. Not coincidentally, exactly one for each child. Rachel was matched with a couple named Helen and Marcus Webb who ran an agricultural research station on a planet called Vedantia, 3 star systems away. They were both xenobotanists, just like her parents had been. They'd lost their own daughter years ago to an illness and had spent the time since then pouring themselves into their work, trying to fill the emptiness. When they saw Rachel's file, read about her parents' research, learned that she liked to help younger kids and wanted to study science when she grew up, something clicked. Their interview lasted 6 hours. The Imperial screeners asked them everything from their parenting philosophy to how they handled conflict to what they'd do if Rachel had nightmares about the meteor storm. Helen and Marcus answered every question honestly, sometimes tearfully. Yes, they were scared of failing. Yes, they knew they could never replace her real parents. But yes, they wanted to try. They wanted to give this girl a home and a future and all the love they had saved up with nowhere to put it. They passed. Before Rachel left Perseus 7, the Emperor came to see her one last time. He found her in the Orphan facility's common room, helping Kevin pack his things. The little boy was also being adopted by a family on a nearby world, and he was torn between excitement and terror about leaving the only home he'd known since the disaster. You'll be okay, Rachel told him, carefully folding his clothes into a small suitcase. Your new parents are nice. I saw their picture. And you can call me anytime you want, okay? The Emperor said we can all stay in touch. Kevin nodded, clutching his stuffed bear. But what if I get scared at night? Then you tell your new mom and dad. And if that doesn't help, you remember that the Emperor said we can call him. He promised. Rachel Anderson, Mordrath said from the doorway. Both children jumped. The Emperor had gotten better at not startling people, but there was only so much you could do when you were a massive dragon. Rachel stood up quickly, smoothing down her shirt in that nervous gesture kids do when adults catch them off guard. Your Majesty. I was just helping Kevin pack. I can see that. You're good at taking care of others. He moved closer, and Kevin immediately hid behind Rachel again. The Emperor had visited enough times now that most of the kids were less terrified, but Kevin was still working on it. I wanted to give you something before you leave. He extended one claw, and balanced on it was a small crystal, about the size of a marble. It glowed with a soft blue light from within, pulsing gently like a heartbeat. This is a communication crystal, Mordrath explained. It's keyed specifically to me. No one else in the entire universe can use it. If you ever need to talk to me, if you're scared or sad or just want to say hello, you hold it and think about reaching me. I'll feel it, and I'll respond. Distance doesn't matter. Time doesn't matter. I will always answer. Rachel took the crystal carefully, cupping it in both hands. It was warm. Really? Even if it's the middle of the night? Even if you're busy with important Emperor stuff. Even then. You made me a promise with your card, remember? You showed me that connection matters. Now I'm keeping my promise to you. You'll never be alone if you don't want to be. Her eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. Thank you. For everything. For saving us. For giving us new families. For making me feel safe. Thank you for teaching an old dragon that some things are more valuable than empires. Rachel left for Vedantia the next day. Helen and Marcus Webb met her at the spaceport, nervous and hopeful and carrying a bouquet of flowers they'd grown themselves. Rachel was quiet at first, polite but distant in the way of children who have learned that people leave. But when Helen showed her pictures of their research greenhouses, when Marcus asked if she wanted to help them with their current project growing earth tomatoes in alien soil, something in her expression softened. My parents grew tomatoes, she said quietly. In our garden dome before. We know, Helen said gently. We read about their work. They were brilliant scientists. We'd be honored to continue what they started, if you'd like to help. Rachel used the communication crystal twice in the first year. Once when she was 12, about 6 months after the adoption. She'd woken up from a nightmare about the meteor storm, so vivid she could still feel the building shaking, could still see the dome cracking open to the void. She tried to calm herself down, had gone through all the techniques her therapist taught her, but the fear wouldn't let go. So she held the crystal and thought about the Emperor. A minute later, her datapad chimed with an incoming call. Mordratha's face appeared on the screen, concerned. Rachel. Tell me what's wrong. She did. She told him about the nightmare, about how sometimes she still got scared, about how she felt guilty for being happy with her new family because it felt like forgetting her real parents. They talked for 2 hours. The Emperor told her about loss he'd experienced across 3,000 years, about how grief doesn't disappear but changes shape, about how love doesn't have a limit and loving new people doesn't erase the ones you lost. He told her that her parents would want her to be happy, that healing wasn't betrayal. By the end, Rachel was calm enough to sleep. The second time was when she was 16. Marcus, her adoptive father, had collapsed in the greenhouse from a sudden illness. The doctor said it was a brain hemorrhage, that he needed surgery immediately but the outcome was uncertain. Rachel sat in the hospital waiting room, Helen sobbing beside her, and felt that old familiar terror rising up. Not again. Please not again. She couldn't lose another parent. She pulled out the crystal. Mordrath responded within seconds. What do you need? My dad is sick. Really sick. The doctors here don't know if they can save him. I can't do this again. I can't lose someone else. Give me the hospital's coordinates. 12 hours later, a medical team arrived from the imperial capital. The finest neurological specialists in the Imperium, with equipment that the Frontier Hospital had only read about in journals. They operated on Marcus for 8 hours straight while Rachel and Helen waited, the Emperor staying connected through the crystal the entire time, talking to Rachel about anything and everything to keep her mind occupied. Marcus survived. Full recovery expected within 6 months. When Rachel tried to thank the medical team, they just smiled. The Emperor himself requested we come. When he asks, we don't say no. Besides, he told us this was for someone important. We're honored to help. But the changes went far beyond 48 children and their families. The Dragon Emperor, who had refused all tribute for 3,000 years, made an announcement that rippled across the entire Imperium. He would now accept one specific type of gift, handmade expressions of gratitude from children. Not expensive art. Not professional work. Just honest thank you cards made by kids who wanted to show appreciation. The first few arrived within days. A young Vorkath child who sent a drawing made with bioluminescent ink, thanking the Emperor for protecting their world from pirates. A Chitta juvenile who wove a small basket from native grasses, grateful for food aid during a drought. A human boy from Earth who sent a clay sculpture of a dragon that looked more like a lumpy potato but came with a note saying, "You're the coolest Emperor ever." Mordrath read every single one. His tribute hall, empty for 3 millennia, slowly filled with crayon drawings, pressed flowers, clay figures, knitted scarves, carved wooden tokens, and simple heartfelt notes. Each one was preserved in a crystalline case and displayed with honors that would make kings weep with jealousy. The imperial bureaucracy, which had operated on formality and tradition for thousands of years, found its priorities quietly shifting. Policies affecting children received unprecedented attention. Educational programs got funding they'd been requesting for decades. Foster care systems across the Imperium were reformed and improved. Youth welfare became a measure of a governor's success. The older species watched in amazement. Humanity had been part of the Imperium for barely 50 years, and already their influence was everywhere. Not through military might or economic power, but through something simpler and more profound. They'd reminded the galaxy that children mattered. That innocence deserved protection. That a hand-drawn thank you card could be worth more than a moon-sized diamond. 20 years after that first visit to Perseus 7, the Dragon Emperor attended a graduation ceremony at the Imperial Science Academy. Among the graduates was Rachel Anderson Webb, receiving her doctorate in xenobotany with a specialization in disaster recovery agriculture. Her thesis was on developing fast-growing crops for colonies affected by catastrophes. She dedicated it to her parents, both biological and adoptive, and to the 4 to 7 other kids who'd survived Perseus 7 with her. Mordrath sat in a section of the auditorium specifically reinforced for beings of his size, watching as Rachel walked across the stage to receive her degree. She'd grown up confident and capable, with laugh lines around her eyes and the steady presence of someone who'd survived the worst and decided to spend her life preventing it for others. After the ceremony, she found him outside. "Thank you for coming," she said, the crystal still hanging on a chain around her neck after all these years. "You didn't have to." "Yes, I did. You taught me something important when you were 9 years old. I wanted to see what you'd become." "What did I teach you?" The Emperor looked at her, this young human who'd been a terrified orphan and was now a scientist ready to help others. "That power means nothing without compassion. That the greatest tribute isn't gold or jewels. It's trust. You trusted me to keep you safe, and that trust changed everything." Rachel smiled. "You know, when I drew that card, I was just a scared kid trying to say thank you in the only way I knew how. I never imagined it would matter so much. The most important things rarely come with fanfare. They come in crayon on construction paper, offered by honest hearts." In the Imperial Tribute Hall, on the central display where everyone could see it, one card remained above all others. A purple dragon and a small human holding hands, both smiling. The crayon had faded slightly over the years, but the crystal preservation kept it intact. Below it, an inscription in the Emperor's own script: "Here lies the tribute that conquered an empire, not with force, but with hope." From Rachel Anderson, age 9, who taught a dragon to feel safe. The Celestial Imperium endured for thousands of years more. Historians marked its golden age as beginning the day an emperor learned that some gifts are priceless not because they are rare, but because they are real. And across 10,000 worlds, children grew up knowing that if they ever needed help, if they ever felt scared or alone, they could reach out to the most powerful being in the galaxy. And he would answer. Because a 9-year-old girl once drew a picture of holding his hand, and he'd promised to never let go.